Gilson schools then, the same standard of workmanship, the same beauty that's in this. The building was designed as like a Palladian house, but of course there's a whole lot of, he had to do a few contortions to get it to be like that. Because first of all, of course, the house wasn't a house in the conventional sense. The house was as close as you could imagine to an apartment building, because it was meant to house a number of teachers. And so therefore you had different teachers entering in different places. I mean, when I was a kid, and in the school on the left-hand side of that side, Tommy Sheridan would disappear for his allowances and reappear through a hole in the wall, because his house was the lower section of that, and his entrance was the door on the left. Mrs. Harford entered through the front door. And as you went in, the house has been now redivided and subdivided. It's also been altered on top. I saw today for the first time a photograph of it with the parapet on top. You can see there the roof over sails. It never did originally. And roofs in those days were regarded as somewhat vulgar and not to be seen, and so therefore parapets were, if your house was of importance, you had a parapet. And you can see on the two side pavilions where the parapet is somewhat there as well. But we then have two pavilions, and again, think of Castletown, think of Russellborough, think of Carlton, think of any of those. And you see that this idea of the two arms was there. But to make this work, what he had to do was he had to turn the whole thing on end. Because for those of us who were there, we recall, there were 3 classrooms. The 3 classrooms went in, the first one was closest to us here, that enormous window. And then a second one, then a third one. The partitions also didn't go the entire height of it, which was a bit of a problem during singing classes. But beautifully made tripartite windows on the front, and the whole thing intended to give a certain scale, a certain grandeur. But again, look at that limestone. It was the most beautiful limestone imaginable. The first time I ever saw a fossil in lime was one day that Tommy Sheridan showed it to me. I've never forgotten it. And understood for the first time, I think ever, the beauty that can be in a natural material. It's an austere house, but look at it again. You've got the slight arch over the basement windows. Then on the main floor, you've got that lovely stonework, and you've got the rounded arches. On the floor above that, again, they're square. On the corners, you've got these raised coin stones. And the 3 centre windows, that front, it's 5 bays across, in other words, 5 windows across. The 3 centre ones are brought just a little bit forward to give it a different scale. And then, the most neoclassical element of all is where you've got that porch being brought forward. The porch looks, again, quite plain when you look at it first. And isn't that the most beautiful lettering? And I don't know where the apostrophe's gone. And I have to say it bothers me that one of the boys' schools seems to be after Y instead of after S, but however, it's me. The pediment, very clear, beautifully proportioned, beautifully proportioned railings. And interestingly, on the register of protected structures, the railings are separately listed as being on ports themselves. Not the small safety railing, which is much more recent there. Look at that. Look at the limestone and look at that little wood scraper at the bottom. Isn't it just beautifully made? And even the monolithic, the 2 small columns in the front of the monoliths made in limestone, and again, so that you change the scale of them slightly by those double recesses that go back, those rectangular recesses, just to change it, full of subtlety. Full of small, small things, so well thought out. You see how the sun catches it and how the shadows fall. It's not a plain house. It is an austere house. It's quite a severe way of doing it. When before the railway stations, would we have seen a span like that? So even in engineering terms, it's a very fine piece of work. And as I recall, this large room used to be 3 rooms in my recollection in the 60s. But again, that large window looking out onto the lawn. And you can see the windows, you can see what they were. They were up and down sliding sash windows. The smartest, most inventive window that ever was, and the best thing for ventilation in any house. Turned into something less than ordinary, because they're no longer square, and they're arced. And they've got just that slight curvature to the top of them. Now, I want to just change tack a little bit, just talk about Oldcastle. Oldcastle in itself. That map is from 1778. I'm sure you've all seen it before, seen versions of it. It was prepared at the request of and on the payment of the Napper family. And on it you see a number of features that are, you see the town as it now is in many ways. You can see the line towards the bottom left of Oliver Plunkett Street. You can see what I've always thought, and I know names have changed, but as I've always thought it was Cloughan Street or Barrack Street, continuing out. You can see that Calvin Street is not there. And if you look towards the bottom right, the southeast, so to say, you see there are no schools there. But what is in the centre is the Market House. Now, not the Market House we know today. You see that there is a church there where St. Bride's now is, off the square. And the form of the square is as it is, in other words, not a square. Left is the road to Mount Nugent, right is what we know of Church Street. Heading toward the bottom is Oliver Plunkett Street, and winding to the right at the top is what is Cloughan Street, in other words, heading down towards the Fairgreen and the railway station. That there is a map of 1836. And there you can see the very significant changes that have happened to the town, mostly because of J.L.W. Napper. In one way or another, he was the landlord. He had a certain view. Now I take this, I have to tell you, other people's work, so these are not my original thoughts on it, but he does appear to have had a certain view on how the town should be developed as a marketplace, as a market town. And so what we now have, in a very short period of time, was that the town had been developed, and been developed quite significantly. If you start on the right-hand side, you see, first of all, there's now a Roman Catholic chapel on the site opposite where the church now is. Beside it, you see the plan of the schools, which is down as the Free School. Going up into the square, you'll see the market house is now 2 or 3 times the size it used to be. It was rebuilt in 1812. St. Bride's Church of Ireland was rebuilt in 1816. The schools were built in 1823. And at some point, between the 1778 map and this 1836 map, Calvin Street came into existence because it had not been there before. And buildings along Calvin Street came into existence as well, down as far as the tan yard my grandmother's house. And what's not there, of course, as you can see, is the railway. And that is the original, or rather a scan of the original coloured map, very beautifully made, available from the Ordnance Survey. This moves forward to 1910. In 1910, you can now see the railway and what happened and how the railway came in. I put one map over the other just for comparison. The railway came in and it cut that road in two. The Stony Road, as I now know it, and most of you probably know it, opposite where I was brought up, that short, straight stretch of it only existed after the railway, because the railway came in and just cut that road in two. So the road that goes down Cloughan Street wasn't there. Sorry, it was. Excuse me, what I'm trying to say is the railway wasn't there, and the railway just stopped it short, because you can't cross railway tracks terribly easily unless you've got pedestrian crossing. And then they built that new road, which is the Stony Road, that runs down parallel to the railway. So that there's the map from 1910, and again, the town has fairly changed. And that is an aerial photograph of 2005. And again, that shape, structure of the town is very much there. The point I'm trying to make is that what we have here is an almost intact 19th century town, an early 19th century town. Interesting buildings around it, and then inside the market house, the centre of everything. Very quickly, just take you for a little tour around the town, a town you all know very well. And you'll see that the character of it is really late Georgian, early Victorian, and in many places quite fine. A lot of stucco work. In addition, some interesting buildings. That's the Northern Bank, well I think it is the Northern Bank. Italian in character. Who would have thought Oldcastle were a couple of Italian buildings? Well, there are. That's one of them. A second one I'll show you in a few minutes is the railway station. And a third one is the parochial house. So there are at least 3 that have Italian influences that are there. Again, very fine cut stone. Look at that. Look how beautifully made this is. A fine range, creams. What on the left are called Stone Kearney's house, the Napper Arms. Again, stucco work, which can be difficult enough. And just in case anyone's listening, if there's any thoughts about this, can I just say to you, excuse me, I'm going to go back. There is a terrible rash in this country, a people taking the stucco work off Roman buildings, and it is the worst thing you could possibly do. It hasn't really happened here, it has happened in Kells. It's as if you took the protective covering off something and you're just going to cause a lot of difficulty for it, because that's not how they were meant to be, and it's not how they work best. The arches of the market house, it said 1812, St. Bride's Church, 1816, the co-op, again, I'm sorry if I'm using older terms, but sorry it's Catholic. Again, look at the quality. It's the limestone in Oldcastle that makes it a very different place. Gibney's, 1862, coincided more or less with the arrival of the railway, which I think was 1863, but presumably they were building in 1862. So Gibney's established, I don't know if the building was built in that, but Gibney's established in 1862. But look at that fine work. Look at the stucco work over the top. Look at the shell. It's worth looking up in Oldcastle. It's worth looking at what's over the shop fronts. And it's worth understanding how intact the entire place is. Again, fashion victim Michael Mullins, as I would think of it. Look at this. Terracotta. Nicely made. Small details. How those windows are inserted. And this is Oldcastle. Lovely arch. Quite a few of these around. Front of Gibney's. Later editions that extended out. But look up there. Herb Streets. And they extended out. And the way it sits over and dominates the square. This lovely detail on Church Street. I wonder how many of you recall that it used to exist on the ground floor as well. I watched in some disappointment the day that it was being taken away. But that detail also existed on the floor below. And these relatively ordinary houses on Church Street, but look again at the use of limestone. I mean, this is a fine town in so many ways. Look how those openings are made. Look at how well that stone is cut. And even here, look at it twice. The proportions of the two, well, again, the teachers' houses, I think of a pair of them there. I regret the windows, but the windows can be changed back. And in the life of any house, windows are probably one of the things that have the shortest amount of life. And they can be changed, they can be restored. Up on the railway, again, this was the fireman's house. Very unusual in Oldcastle. It's brickwork, but it was more or less brought out of the railway. And look at that fine stonework, again, limestone being used. This is a building that needs to be minded. It needs to be saved. It's not gone to the point that it can't be restored very, very well. And even look at this, where the old water tank for the steam engines used to be, and look at the corners and how well built that is. Parochial house, again, as I said, Italian influences. Look at the work around the windows, and the way the eaves overhang. And then later on, 1900, or thereabouts, by W.H. Byrne. This church, which is so like a number of other churches. If any of you have ever gone to a mass or a funeral in Donnybrook Church in Dublin, you walk in and think, am I in Oldcastle? Because done by the same people, using the same craftsmen. And here the introduction of marble, polychromatic, different colours, and some very, very fine carving. And even the tiling down the centre. It really is a fine building. And it's just, why am I showing all these things? Because we're so ordinary, and because, like me, you may not look at them every time, and you may not notice them, and I hope maybe you might look at them twice. You saw earlier the picture of the market house and how the market house used to be. I don't think anything that was done to it in the 60s improved it. There it is as it formerly was. You can't really go back once you've gone somewhere. And I really just want to finish on those last two slides. And the point I do want to make is, if you have something that's worth keeping, and if you lose it, it's almost impossible to get it back.